Let's just kind of find out a little bit more about you maybe before we start. So I was going to ask you two questions. One, can you tell me one thing that Google doesn't know about you? That's the kind of personal thing. And then the second thing, what do you believe is the biggest marketing trend for 2019? Sam, we'll start with you, sir.
But the Google thing's tough. I live like most people in the room, I would think, through the internet. But maybe about how close I am with my family. I guess I'm not really Googling my family that often, but I'm very, very close with my family. They all live in South Florida. I'm from Miami, and we're a very, very tight group. So Google may not have all of those insights, but Facebook might. And then for 2019, I think I'm curious to see if 2019 is the year that the AR and the VR stuff really starts coming into focus. I think that media has been making a lot of progress with it. People have been investing against it. We've seen a lot of big bets placed there. But I don't know if it's something that many of us and many consumers in general have really brought into their lives. We've seen some big wins, the Pokemon stuff. They tried some stuff in the sports world, but this could be a year where if Christmas sales of VR products go well, I know they're trying to bring prices down on that stuff, and then companies start really engaging with the platforms, things like Magic Leap, et cetera, we could see some really, really big gains there. So,
lovely. Thank you, Steve. Marilyn.
I'm from a border town. I don't think the internet maybe knows that so much about me. I feel like that's definitely played into who I am, understanding who you're talking to, coming from a border town where across the border, I always say this, I thought as I was growing up as a child that everybody wanted to move to Mexico. I was not aware in the US that everyone didn't want to move to Mexico, because where I'm from, it's a very small town across the border from Mexicali, which has 1.2 million people. So I always thought that my goal in life was to move that way. I didn't understand that everybody wanted to move the other way. And then kind of what I'm thinking about for trends in terms of what 2019 and 2020 really has to hold for me and my team. We're really working a lot in the AI and machine learning space in order to serve up the right offer to the right customer at the right time, which sounds easy when you say that way, but it's really difficult, especially as we try and get to more automated marketing. And that's ultimately where I want to see my team go, is having those automated marketing campaigns that can just trigger off of behaviors. And we've got a lot of data at Caesars, which is great, but being able to then take that to the next step and be able to action off of that data.
Lovely. Thank you, Darren.
I haven't done the ego search in a while, so I think I'm due. But what I'm wondering is, I don't think Google knows that my hair color. I don't think they do. Nobody really has bald as a listing, right? So that's number one. And number two, what I see happening really is, I'm waiting for the company to go all in direct to consumer and have a tipping point into retail and eating everybody's lunch because they can fund it and subsidize their media spend. That's what I'm waiting to see. The next Beachbody, the next Peloton, something come in and just destroy everybody and go, what happened? Because I think it's coming.
Lovely. Thank you, Steve. Chris.
Well, I don't think Google knows that I am actually a ballroom dancer. And I have a Foxtrot performance coming up this year, this holiday season, and that I also love to cook Sunday dinner. So there you go.
Wow.
Definitely doesn't know that about
Cue
me.
the music.
It does know that I used to go on Tinder, and it was a big fail. I mean, and I saw a lot worse than that, by the way. And in terms of trends, I mean, I think one thing we're very bullish on this year is we're introducing a new AI tool, which I know that's a very controversial subject for everybody, but marrying art and science together, or like we like to say, math and magic. How do we tie the idea of content creation to contextual alignment and do that in a very powerful way that delivers true KPIs? And I think that's something I haven't seen a brand or even us able to do yet. So that's going to be we're very bullish on it next year.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So question number one then, marketing, it is kind of and/or. Marketing is shifting from talking at people and focusing on transactions to engaging with people, building meaningful, lifelong, and personalized relationships. Driving engagement should be a marketer's number one priority. Or the focus on engagement has made modern marketers soft. They've lost the art of asking for the sale. Marketing is ultimately about driving sales, and if you don't achieve a conversion, then there is no success. Is marketing about driving greater engagement or driving greater sales? Start with you, Marilyn.
I think marketing is more about driving sales than it is necessarily about the engagement piece. I say that coming from an industry that's heavily data-driven, so we definitely watch that very intently. There used to be a joke that you could basically get fired at Caesars for not doing a test and control group to understand how your marketing campaign drove revenue. So it's definitely ingrained in me that we have to be able to do that. I look at the engagement stuff a bit softer. If I can't measure it, then I don't know what I'm doing. So for me, that's straight home.
Sam?
So I look at marketing as such a big universe, right? And that's something that I've just noticed off of the short time that we've been in this summit so far, is just how diverse everyone's perspectives on exactly what marketing is, from all the different perspectives of the different kinds of businesses and the different structures of the marketing organizations that people are coming from, the perspectives, so many different things. And I think that marketing is about building a relationship with your consumer based on whatever the brand identity that you've built for your company and your product is, which is also part of marketing, right? So I think that marketing is both, right? It's a courtship and a relationship. That's what it is. I think that marketing is the relationship that a company has with its consumer. And like all the relationships that we've been in, at least the healthier ones, like there's times where you're really close and you're spending a lot of time together. There's times when you're being more romantic, and there's times that you're being more practical. And I think that that's what the bigger picture of marketing's responsibility is with its consumers, right? Is sometimes you need to remind them about who you are and what you've done. You need to be a little bit more romantic. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more forceful and be like, hey, now's the time when you do this. Come in. So sometimes you're doing more push marketing. Sometimes you're doing more pull marketing. So I just think it's important to be balanced. It's about reading your customer. It's about letting them get to know you, but also being sure that when you've given them enough reason and confidence and credibility that you're also able to cash in on that. So I think it's about all of those things.
Yeah, sure. Chris?
I mean, I sit in a position where I get to interact with a lot of different brands and a lot of different categories. And the first thing I would ever ask anyone that would come, into a meeting is, who is your brand and what does it want to do and what does it mean to its audience that it has and the audience that it wants to have? I don't think that this is a one-trick pony. I don't think it's one answer for any one brand or category. I think it really does depend on the maturity of your brand. Are you a new brand? Are you a direct-to-consumer brand? Are you a typical brick-and-mortar brand? Like, where are you coming from in what your goals are? What is your current status? What is your goal? And then just sort of figuring out the right path there. I don't feel that there's any one right answer. I feel like I agree with you, Sam, in the sense that it is about building brand love, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tomorrow. It is about creating a relationship, and a relationship does have different functionality at different phases of that relationship. But I just don't think it's one answer, and I think if you do think it's one answer, then you're failing, because I think you have to diagnose your brand, understand it, your relationship with your audience, and where does that need to grow, and that's where I would lean in.
I see. Darren?
Yeah, I think we got some great answers here based on their experiences, and I would say that it's really about storytelling, and that the art of storytelling is probably the most important, and that'll dictate what the message needs to be for your consumer at the right place at the right time. I will say this, that fundamentally as a brand marketer, I hate brand marketing, and the reason why, because I think there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of waste, and it just really upsets me every day because I don't know where that waste is. And I think we're all in a fight to find out where the waste is. We get a pressure from our board, we get pressure from the CFO, we get a pressure from the equity team, whatever it might be, to uncover the waste and make it incredibly efficient. And sometimes because of that fight to make it more efficient and to uncover every little pixel and data point, we lose the art of the story. And we can't focus then on that big hook. What's the big idea? What's the big message I want to tell the universe? At Slimfast, it was really simple. I looked, when I joined the team, it was a red bottle in the hourglass shape, and it had a little claim on it at the very bottom. It said 4 hours of hunger control. And I looked at the then president and I said, why is this in legalese? Why is the main benefit to your consumer legalese? Like, that's why they want to take it, right? They want to take this because they want to feel full and they want to lose weight, right? Well, yeah. I'm like, well, let's tell that story. And let's tell that story in the right medium for the right consumer and say, yeah, here we are. We're Slimfast, and we're a weight loss brand. And if you want to lose weight, guess what? You won't be hungry. You'll be full, and it'll taste pretty good. And then let's make sure we have the right touch points at every point we can, but let's not lose that art of the story.
Absolutely.
Can I ask, does that come down to like are you a public company? And this is kind of what we were talking about, Sam, before. Like, are you a public company or are you a privately held company? Because I think like your bottom line sales ultimately comes down to like what you're reporting and who your master is. I mean, do you feel like that plays a lot into like how brand marketing gets evaluated?
Yeah, and it was really interesting. So this was my first foray into private equity. So Unilever owned Slimfast. They bought it off Danny Abrahams for $2.4 billion, had $1 billion in sales, and did a great job at driving it down to $129 million in sales in 12 years. Yeah, so all I had to do was show up and go, wait, I'm going to do marketing 101 and, high five. But it really was really interesting because it's private equity, and private equity is like pump and dump, right? Let's build it up and let's sell it and let's move on. And so you treat it differently than you would treat maybe with strategic ownership or a public company, where you have a lot of brand nurturing and love and make that investment and not worry about the payback right away. And so what we did is what we knew is because we had food, drug, mass distribution, we don't do DTC. We said we're in Walmart, and what does Walmart need? Walmart needs a brand that is on TV. And so we flipped a switch on TV, we made the brand relevant, took it out of the hourglass-shaped bottle, we made it more appealing to men and women, and sales went up 36% in 6 weeks. And then from there, it just hockey sticked. And private equity was happy, but we did some of the basics, and we told the story. We said, hey, we're a weight loss brand. When Weight Watchers call themselves WW, and everybody thinks diet's a four-letter word, we're going to lean in, and we're going to say we're Slimfast. In fact, funny story is that the then president said, we're going to call this SF, and we're not going to call this Slimfast, and it's going to be an adult nutrition brand. And we're like, oh, no, that's going to be a weight loss brand. After 40 years of $1.1 billion in marketing spend, people know it is a weight loss brand, and we're going to be that. But let's tell that story. Let's get before and afters, and let's tell people the real world that this is the way to lose weight, this is America's weight loss brand, and let's make sure we have the right story for the right medium. And you know what? Our website wasn't updated, and we didn't even activate social for 6 months, and it still went up. So it was kind of remarkable, all that brand heritage and brand love. So maybe a different brand, a different time, different story, but it really was owning up to that big idea and what we stood for.
And I think that all of that goes back to what is important about marketing, is that marketing is a function of what the business needs, right? It can be a tool that can drive sales, and it could be a tool to build brand and emotional connectivity, but it's about what does the company need, right? Like, it's always crazy, and I know that there's so many romantic sides, like that's not the most romantic story, right? But like, Slimfast didn't need romance. Slimfast needed sales, right? And that was driven by the business needs of the owners. And yes, like, some companies are really fortunate to be private and have a visionary owner who believes in these kind of things. Patagonia just donated $10 million to environmental funds, right? Like, amazing marketing move and incredibly humanitarian, but like not necessarily the business decision that another company may do. So marketing needs to be whatever it needs to be to the business that it's functioning under at that time. And if you're lucky and you're good, you can deliver that as a marketing person for that company, and you can evolve that role and build the brand into many different things and use it to create a really dynamic company.
So I agree with all that, going a little bit more into the storytelling aspects, but kind of saying, when you understand the data elements also, kind of what we were talking about, you can influence that behavior a bit more. In my experience, right, even knowing when to touch the guest can lead to higher conversion rate, higher revenue spend, upwards of 50% from just going and telling somebody, hey, is your day going well? How's it going so far? And doing that personal touch, but without having the data to then be able to market to that person immediately, you can't do that. And that's not so much a storytelling of a brand, but that's in the moment of a trip. And kind of all of us have different areas within marketing that we're focused on. Some of us being focused on the overall brand and the aspects that that'll bring and the experience for the customer, but some of us kind of maybe even in trip for that moment where that guest, and obviously I think about it more in the hospitality aspects, how much more of that share of wallet can I get from that guest when I already have them on site? How can I market to them further to get more money out from their pocket?
Absolutely. So I've got one more question, and then we'll be turning over to you. So please do have a think if there's anything you would like to ask any of our fantastic panelists. But I'd like to touch on, Darren, something you sort of mentioned there, the kind of, Slimfast going a little more sort of gender neutral and that sort of thing. And I think regardless of, this isn't a kind of political thing, but social media, when it started, was amazing. We could all go on Facebook and see our friends, and then we all got bored of everybody's photos of food. And then this year feels very much like the year that social media started to lead the public conversation. And I think it surfaced gender issues very, very quickly. Clearly, politics, the political conversation has changed and all that sort of stuff. So I suppose the question, increasing number of brands are throwing traditional gender assignations under the bus and reimagining both masculinity and femininity as fluid concepts. Are the day of blue and pink aisles in decline? And what does this mean for your brand? How are you reacting to this?
Yeah, I would have to say, just looking at media today and the conversations, I would say yes, we see that. And one of the things that we did with Slimfast is that, I'll back up a little bit, is that, I've been in the weight loss and nutrition business for 20 years. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I used to get hate mail from women's groups for putting women in bikinis and throwing ads on TV. That's kind of objectifying in many ways and creates like eating disorders, right? It creates a lot of body image problems. And we did that in a time where it made sense and it sold a lot of product. And when we had Slimfast, what we said was, and different ownership, of course, but I looked at it and said, okay, we have to celebrate the small victories. We have to make this psychological journey where it's like, yes, hey, you did it. You just got started. Congratulations. And people were fully clothed, and they just celebrate all different shapes and sizes, and whatever it is to you, that's fine. Let's make it personal. And we had every different color, every different race, men and women together celebrating it. And then we even, historically, the brand's been 90% female, 10% male, but we made a conscious effort to appeal more to the male audience and to let people know they can be comfortable in their own skin. And it served us very well. And it really wasn't about male, female. It really was about just celebrating your victories in life and being comfortable and vulnerable and happy in your own skin. And it served us, I think, quite well. Our campaign was, Slimfast, it's your thing. Whatever that thing is to you, we're there for you to support you. And it worked. So it wasn't black, it wasn't white, it wasn't blue, it wasn't pink. It was, what is it for you? And we're here for you.
And what about, Red Bull, something that I guess kind of traditionally high adrenaline sort of, certainly that's a part of your marketing mix. Has it made a difference for you?
Well, I think that there's some things that are gender neutral, right? So taking a step away from the idea of gender fluidity, which is incredibly fascinating, and I've been learning from some of the younger people that I work with what it really means, the whole concept of sexual fluidity, gender fluidity, race fluidity. But there are certain things that are just human stories, right? And those things are more about the things that connect us, regardless of any of those other qualifications. And those are the kinds of stories that are separate from those things. So that can play into anything from sports to music and culture, and that's what we tend to try to play with, right? And it does go back to storytelling, because I was just watching the Silver Awards, which were the top awards for British commercials for last year, and what really tied them all together wasn't it was a wide group of different brands, sports companies, the Vegemite or something, like a British Jam, some stuff that we don't even get here. It was all car companies, all kinds of different stuff. But what I've seen effective marketing and effective advertising, which is in this case a tool of marketing, really gravitates was a strong emotional core. And it was about the ties that bind. And when you are able to tell those stories, you're able to connect with both genders. So it doesn't matter about standard, typical gender roles, male or female, trans, bi, sexual preferences. None of these things mattered, right? They just cut to the core of human storytelling, human experience, human challenge in overcoming those things. And that's where there's really a lot of power to do that. And really, there is an emotional core to whatever your company does, because if you're a bank, right, there's still emotional situations that will come up through the financial experience, right? There's things about getting yourself organized, going into a place of overcoming financial setbacks, and a bank or a credit card can help with that, right? Insurance can help with that. And that's maybe not what most people would think about when they think about advertising, financial institutions or instruments, right? A lot of times you're thinking about percentage points or the kind of deals that you can get or the state of the economy. But if you find stories that are separate from these things that separate people, and you look at the things that can appeal to everybody, then you could build the stories that form deep brand connections and affinities, eventually conversion and product differentiation, regardless of who your client is or the way that they may identify.
Absolutely. I think also only the British would call their top marketing awards the Silver Awards. It's just an incredibly British thing to do, isn't it?
The winner of the Silver Awards got a gold.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Chris?
So, I mean, I understand the idea that color plays a huge role in visual cues and branding and brand identification. And when you walk down an aisle, you want someone to see pink and feel like they connect to it. Like, I want to start off by saying I understand the power of color in communicating brand, but I would say that if you're choosing, just to answer your question very directly, pink or blue to identify a gender, then you're definitely colorblind. I think that is absolutely just a very old school way of thinking. And if you actually look at, I looked this up, by the way, blue and pink weren't actually the original gender assignments for men and women. Pink was for men in 1918 by Ladies' Home Journal because it was a more powerful color. And pink was daintier. I mean, blue was daintier, so they gave that to women, and that changed around the 40s. So really, it's so subjective, and I think women are at war with pink right now. Some women embrace it and use it as a power color, and some women are struggling with it and meaning that it's a sign of oppression in a sense. So I think that if you are still thinking that pink and blue exist, if you want to connect with people, then that's something that I would recommend you change. I think everything you guys have said is finding the common denominator in the human experience. That is the most powerful tool you can have as a marketer.
Yeah, I completely agree that I think pink and blue goes away in the future. I think it was an easy way, right, for people to segment off of and to be able to say, I'm going to target that way. But in the future, that goes away, especially as people are giving us more data, more aspects to go off of, and you're able to really personalize that message or that story that you're trying to get to them. This just goes away in the future. It was a very simplistic way of doing things. It was good at the time, but times have evolved, and we no longer are in a space where it's just so much just pink and blue. You should be able to get down to a granular detail for that person. I think the consumer expects it at this point. They're going to be offended if you tell them, oh, why don't you come over and do this spa appointment when they've never once done it ever? Why would you give them that as a marketer? Why would you give them that offer? So yeah,
it's a very good point about the data, because it is about the commonalities then, isn't it? You can actually market far more effectively to a group of whatever gender based on the fact that they've probably got more in common than the fact that they're like pink.
And there's so many strange social cues too, and the places that they come from, like to your point about color designations and who made that determination. It sounds like a fashion magazine, right?
Sure, yeah.
Right? And body image. Like these things are constantly cycling in and out, like where, at one point a portlier body shape, a fuller body shape was considered the height of sexiness, and being tan was really terrible because that means
and
you
bald.
were working, so it was being really that, or wearing wigs was extremely fashionable, and French men were wearing makeup in the time of the aristocracy. Like these things change so much that I think that sometimes as a brand, you also need to be aware of what is happening in the social conversation when it comes to figuring out what you're going to do to appeal to your target consumer, right? It's not always the horse leading the cart. Sometimes you gotta wait around and make sure that you're like, okay, so how are people feeling about themselves? And how do I either leverage that or try to become part of that conversation? And you could go either way, right? I think that's a big part of what's happening in politics right now. There's such an interesting moment right now with politics being so inflamed and so probably the most anyone's talked about politics in the history of the United States, maybe since like the Civil War or since civil rights. It's hard to say, but certainly in the last 15 years, this is a moment, right? Everyone's talking about politics, and all of a sudden you see big brands jumping into that conversation, right? And now this is a little bit different than gender issues, but those are really gender politics. And when brands right now have two decisions. They can either go and become part of that conversation, which will certainly make them, can create awareness, right? Nike just did this to great effect, and some people question it, right? People were burning their Nikes because they were so offended that Nike would get behind Colin Kaepernick, and then their sales also grew, right? And the NFL had very similar situations. So, but not all brands are getting into that. Not all brands are getting into those conversations, and not all brands have to pick a gender that they're going to appeal to. It's all of these are really important marketing decisions, but things that should be, again, done thoughtfully. They should be done in terms of what's important to the brand, and ultimately, is this going to drive what we're trying to achieve as a business, both in the short term and the long term?
I'd like to add something to that, actually. And it comes back a little bit to the data, right, and the conversations, which is one of the things that we did is that we had a moment where we realized, wait a minute, maybe the consumer will tell us what they want to talk about. And so we actually went and created a Facebook group rather than just our business page, and because we knew, well, if we post something, everybody's gonna reach it anyway, so yay, we beat Facebook. But it was really about doing a group and let that conversation start. And we seeded it with our ambassadors who lost weight, and they told their narrative, their story, because everybody is a champion in their own right. The stories they have are just incredible. They got rid of a bad relationship, they got they got a new job, they rediscovered happiness, et cetera, and they shared that, and it brought their friends in, and it kind of grew and grew and grew to thousands and tens of thousands of people. And what we learned was to listen, and we saw some really incredible stories. The most incredible of all, it reflected real life, which was that women will talk a lot more than men and share a lot more than men, and it kind of like, it was really obvious to us that we had to make it more emotional to connect with the women and tell real stories. The men didn't really connect to it, but then we launched a new product line called Slimfast Keto a few months ago, and we created a new group, and guess what? The men are dominating the conversation because it's cool to talk about keto, and they're talking about it like crazy. And so it's relevant and it's timely, but they're telling us how to market to them. So it's kind of really cool in a way to see technology be used that way for like real-time insights. And to your point about data, right? Like, been data starved as a traditional marketer for so long. He got this. I'm like, wow, watch out. We can do something. It's kind of fun. But the conversation and be relevant. It's kind of almost there for you in many ways. It's just, can you tap into it and can you listen?
It's almost like you guys are students of humanity, and that's what we all are. If we want to know how to entertain or connect to people, we've got to listen, and we've got to find the place that is meaningful to them. And then when your brand can kind of find that sweet spot and find that intersection between your story and their story, like that seems to be the winning combination whenever a brand succeeds, is being a student of your consumer. And when you do that and you dive into that and you take that seriously, you're going to win every time.
Yeah, and be like a megaphone for them, right? And like amplify the stage for them to celebrate their victories, because there's always heroes and there's always people who lose, but let's just celebrate them because they don't usually have those stages. So we found that works really well. Yeah, it's a great point.
Marilyn, did you have something to say, and then we'll go to the audience?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, as you guys are talking about, like, how do we make sure that the consumer understands they're meeting those milestones too, right? Because you want them to understand that they just achieved that special milestone with your brand, and you want them to achieve the second one. And the third one, I think that plays into more of like what you start seeing with leaderboards or special challenges that brands have been bringing forward. So that all starts to tie together.
Lovely, thank you. And keto is the big devil dog from Stephen King, is that right? I enjoyed that book, it was great. Right, so any questions from the audience?
I'm really interested to know, you talk about the importance of listening and the idea of understanding the narrative of your customers. What do you see as the most important first step for businesses looking to capture that conversation more effectively? Where do you go? How are you approaching that challenge?
I could answer that, but I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, great question, right? So number one, respond to them when they ask, right? So I think we had to set up an infrastructure to respond to consumers. That's the first thing. So if you start something, be prepared to finish it. And somebody who's a quick start by nature, that's kind of painful for me, but it really is important to like continue the conversation, but also have an end to it and guide them to something. So we had to set up like tools and systems, like maybe it's a meal planner in our case, or direct them to a support group or something like that, so they can get the tools they need to succeed. One of the things that we did, in traditional media is that we said, okay, well, let's start nurturing our consumers and let's start educating and talking with them rather than at them. And so we just put a text campaign at the end of our TV commercials because it's like free media anyways. So we did it, and we were getting like tens of thousands of emails a week off of existing media, and we put them into a funnel, and we funneled them into like email series, nurtured them, and then got them into our Facebook group, and then started having the dialogue. And we found that that was like really remarkable. And then we hired brand ambassadors to go and communicate with them, as well as in-house staff that had the tools. They either say, listen, I did it, I was in your shoes, and let me help you, this is what worked for me, or let me direct you to a professional who can get you what you need, like dietitians, et cetera. So you got to be set up for success, I think, is the most important, but you got to start too, right? You got to start and then kind of figure it out, but be prepared to make the investment.
Anyone else have anything to add?
Walmart just launched a mental health clinic inside their stores. You talk about listening and caring about your audience. I mean, that's taking healthcare to a whole other level. They're listening to the cultural zeitgeist and seeing that, people are in need and they don't know where to go, and there's a lot of shame involved in mental illness. So they, as a company, know that they're partnering with this, this clinic to kind of make mental health, more accessible. And I think that's an extraordinary testament to listening to your audience and being in tune to them and understanding your role as a community leader. When you're brick and mortar, you are part of your community, and you have a responsibility to that community. And I feel that that's an extraordinary move by them to really say, we're invested, we're here, and we're gonna help. And I think that that says so much about the power of brand relationship to your audience. It's not a separate thing, it's a very integral thing, and it's a lean-in experience that if you as a brand care enough, they will pay it back tenfold.
Thank you, Mr. Tate.
And I was just going to say, I think listening for at least some people in the industry gets harder with all the technology that's come in place. It used to be a lot easier to respond to a customer complaint that would come in, but now there's so many different ways that a customer can voice that complaint that it's harder to control that response. So that's kind of one area that we've been struggling with, is making sure that we can control that response, but then also make sure that customer is happy, right, coming back. So it's a little bit of a harder one for us to control in the hospitality industry, just because there's so many different forums for them to go and voice their concern on.
Absolutely. Sam?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because in the first workshop that we had, something that I guess I sort of just personally as a marketer pushed aside is sometimes the glut of data, right? Where there's so much information available that you're like, what am I listening to? What am I starting with? Like, what's the most important piece of data? Our moderator gave a great thing. That if you torture data enough, it'll tell you whatever you want to hear. I think there's also another side of that where if you look hard enough, you'll find whatever data you want to make what you believe in true, right? Like the cult of data. But for me, I really believe that all marketing is really lifestyle marketing. And I think that if you start by identifying what your business needs are, and then you look to what the next step should be, which is identifying who your consumer is, right? Really think about that consumer in a multi-dimensional way, right? They're not a statistic. They're not a series of data points. I guess they can be interpreted as such, but you're always going to have a flatter version of what they are. And the product that you are trying to sell them is not going to be the only product that they buy. So there's always tons of things, even if you were a brand new product, right, and you didn't have any ambassadors and you didn't have any social footprint, you didn't have any of those things, you could start by thinking about who is this person or who are these people and what are the kinds of things that they're interested in? What are the other things that make up their identity and their society? And then you could start doing the work. You got to dive into that. You got to learn about that world. And you'll start uncovering all kinds of things that are very important to connecting to them, such as aesthetic decisions, such as values, priorities, places where they go, which can turn into great marketing, where you're placing your ads and how you're connecting with them. So, it's really about knowing who your consumer is and learning about them, becoming somebody that understands them, so then you can become a valuable partner to them.
Very much indeed. Do we have any other questions? We have a question back there. Yes, sir.
So I think a lot of the kind of common theme here has been that we're going from traditional advertising to more of a conversation and a way of really building that story. And I'd be curious to hear, we know, I think, what the story is. We develop what the proposition is and so on from the brand side. I'm on the brand side, so we come up with that. But I'd love to hear a couple of interesting sort of creative approaches of how it turned that conversation into something that was just much more meaningful and more engaging than it ever could have been. And an example I'll give is having been with Gillette and worked on the fusion business. Their principle was, or their message was, turning skeptics into believers. And when they launched, this is way back before viral was, when it was really emerging, but when it was finding those skeptics and turning them into believers and getting them to transmit that message. And I'd just love to hear a couple of stories of how you found that way and sort of said, this is how we'll do it, not through traditional brand planning, but here's that interesting insight or that interesting, kind of inference where you could go and where it propelled the brand.
Interesting insights. This is their thinking faces, if anybody wanted to know.
I mean,
Go ahead. Go ahead. So I'll well, my answer is
polite
going to be
up
really
here.
simple
See
because
this?
there was no aha moment. And it's funny because I wish it was like, wow, we found this real nugget of information that was, in social media or some listening tool that said, aha, this is it. I'll tell you what it really was. It was the gut. It was a lot of experience of a lot of bright people in a room that had dozens and dozens of years of experience creating and running brands and in the space that said, this is it. This is what we need to do. This is it. This is aha. And then we went and tested ideas, of course, traditionally, but it was not one little piece of data that said, okay, this is that point of inference. This is what we're going to put the campaign on. It was a collective gut experience. Not sexy, but it worked for us.
I think that there's something really important with what you just said. It's all true, but I was talking to I was in between a couple of guys from agencies earlier, and I love agencies. The work that they do is incredible. Some of the most talented creatives in the marketing space certainly are within the agency side. But I think that comes with a partnership with a really strong marketing team at the company. And whether you're a team of one or a team of 5,000, right? You have a huge marketing department, like my company. It takes really that marketing person really knowing the brand, right? And the only way that you're going to be able to make those connections and listen to your consumers and build it out, it's not about giving them whatever they want. It's not about telling them what they want to hear. It's about responding to them as you are, who you are as a brand. How would that brand's personality respond empathetically to what the concerns of the consumers are? And I think that that's where you get the most things. So to your point, yeah, it takes really good people really knowing the brand and really listening to the consumer and thinking about it and then coming up with these ideas and getting them back out there. But it really comes from having a deep understanding of your brand, just the way that I was saying earlier about looking at your consumer from a multidimensional perspective, also understanding your brand from a multidimensional perspective, not just its functionality and not just its aesthetic and not just its logo, but like who it really is. And then you can speak effectively in its voice. And I think that's where all the best ideas always come from.
Thank you. Marilyn?
So I think we've got a lot of good ideas, right, that we've tried to implement over the years. But ultimately what's made Caesars, formerly Harrah's, a strong house has been understanding the customer data at a customer profile set. So we've got just so much data, and I've been talking to people here that are usually very jealous of how much data a casino can have and come through to understand all various aspects of the customer. And for me, those are where the greatest insights have come in from, because we've got a strong analytics team that helps us understand that data so that then we can market effectively off of it. So they come to us and they say, hey, we've noticed this trend. If the consumer does this, we have 90% confidence that they're going to do this much more later. And having those insights has honestly been super powerful for us, because we're able to translate that into real action right away. And we do have insights that have come in through that way, where it's like, if so-and-so plays blackjack, right, and we've done it for so long, we know that they're immediately going to want to do this, right? So we've got some real good insights from that. But that wouldn't come to us without understanding and having the foundational technology layer with all of the data, and having a strong analytics team who the marketers are willing to listen to. Because I've seen marketers come in too that dismiss that and say, I'm going to go with more of my gut, and that hasn't tended to work out for us, at least.
And Caesars, obviously a very strong entertainment brand. I'd love to know what the insight was that led you to create the salad dressing. Because that was a stroke of
created in
genius.
Tijuana, Mexico.
Yeah.
Very easiest way to keep them gambling.
Absolutely. Chris?
I've had the privilege of working on several brand campaigns where I felt like they were going on a soul-searching journey. And most recently, Ulta Beauty came to us and said, we want to really challenge the beauty ideals. And I think Dove had done that very successfully many years ago, but they wanted, they're a brand that sells makeup, and makeup is about covering up your naturalness, and they wanted to challenge themselves on that, and I thought it was really quite brilliant. So they decided to invest in a survey to talk about self-perception of beauty, but also, have you judged others, and why have you judged others, and what have you judged them based on? And they really looked at it from a fluidity standpoint. So this really was about inclusivity, like how do we serve this sort of ever-changing view on beauty that's more inclusive now than ever in terms of racial profiling as well as gender profiling. How do we serve this growing audience? And this is what I think that they were really trying to delve into. So they went full force into the survey, and we actually brought it into the narrative of our shows. It was on Today's Show, it was on E! We brought it to Telemundo, so we did it in 2 languages. So that was, again, really holistic as a, total market campaign, which I don't know that we talk enough about. So it was such a privilege to be part of that journey with them, and they brought us in. And this is what I would say to you guys as brands: when you can bring us into that and sort of share your underbelly. There's champions that grow from that. We want to so help you guys deliver on that, and they've had so much success. Like, we're going into year 2. It's incredible to see a brand be willing to be vulnerable and call themselves out of what their proposition was. It was a very powerful moment for me in sort of observing a sort of fresh new brand doing that, right? So I would say that they really listened. They leaned in. They didn't just do this as a one-off. It wasn't just some silly search. I mean, they went deep, and they completely reevaluated their brand, and they created an anthem spot, the Beautiful Possibilities, and it was really about infinite. How you define it is really up to you, and it was just a beautiful campaign. I encourage you guys to check it out.
I think it's just a funny thought to connect both sides of this. Is like, in the makeup space, like, and gender fluidity, like, and French aristocracy and Slimfast, like, there's probably going to be in the near future a growing market for men's makeup.
Yeah.
And that's like just funny, taking a
It's
bunch of
already
different
happening.
insights from what we've been
100%.
talking about, like business idea people. If you're working for a makeup company, may want to really think
But
about
Sam,
that.
can I challenge you on that? It wouldn't be men's makeup. It would just still be makeup.
Right? No, I
Makeup.
just mark up a makeup that's marketed in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I grew up in the 80s. I can assure you men's makeup was quite the thing.
Not
back
too
David
then.
far in
Bowie
the
wore
past
great
either.
eyeliner.
It's
No one
all
wore
I
right.
went
eyeliner
way too
like
far in the
David Bowie.
past.
Yeah.
My cousin used to
Glam
wear
rock
cover-up.
did it
He said,
well.
What is it? What is it?
Right, I know that there are more questions. Thank you very much, Steve, but we are going to kind of draw this to a close. So our panelists are all here, so please do come find them afterwards. Just very quickly, like 20 seconds each, just to pull this up. The biggest marketing threat. What do you see looking forwards as the biggest threat to marketing? This might be a technology, this might be a competitor, it might be a stakeholder. What's the biggest threat to marketing success in the next couple of years? Chris?
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
I mean, I think it's actually extraordinary, privileged to see a generation come up so democratized in their accessibility to information and their ability to influence it. I think that is an audience that is gender fluid, that is racially fluid, that is fluid in every single way. So pinning them down and segmenting them like we like to do as marketers is going to be a very big challenge for us in the future.
Lovely. I thought it was a sister of Jay-Z for a second.
Her too.
Anybody? Darren.
I would actually say that AI is something to watch out for, and I'm really, really concerned about it because one thing I really love is a great copywriter. And I think a great copywriter can make or break your business. And if we end up relying too heavily on AI to tell the narrative for us, that we might be missing some opportunities. So that has me up at night.
Lovely, thank you. Marilyn.
Yeah, so I was going to say AI, but I guess I'll veer off of that as well. But yeah, AI, for similar reasons, right? What's right for one person, you might think is right for the next, but maybe it's not, right? And you're not measuring that effectively. But I also think in terms of what we've been talking about a lot with brands, how quickly a brand can go from being a good brand to all of a sudden the story the next day could be just one person had a horrible experience. We've seen this a lot, right, with a couple brands lately in the airline business, right? Where all of a sudden you've got your whole consumer base against you. So I think the way that can happen on a flip of a dime, and then you have to control that narrative, is kind of scary for the future, especially with how social media maybe can put out more and more and more of that, and it's hard for you to put that fire out. So that's what.
Finally, Sam.
I think that for me, what's a concern is people getting too data-driven. You know, I often reference the Steve Jobs quote, and I'm paraphrasing, is that our consumers don't know what they want until we give it to them, until we create it for them. And I think that there's a threat that with so much data and so much analytics that people start using that as a replacement for creativity and innovation. And I just hope that people don't let that happen. I think that marketing is about inspiring people in whatever version of that works for your business. And I hope that people don't get too caught up in being overly responsive, that they stop being unique for their brand. So,
thank you much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, the ABBA of marketing, your panel, thank you very much indeed.